A determined woman arrived at a failing ranch. Give me one chance, I won't waste it. If you pull that trigger, the water stays buried forever. The voice cut through the hot, stagnant wind like a serrated blade. Wyatt's eyes snapped open. He sat on the edge of the splintered porch of the sundown ranch, staring at the single brass cartridge in his trembling hand. One for the bank? He had whispered to the empty, bone-dry plains just moments ago. One for the road. He had slid the bullet into the chamber of his Winchester, ready to surrender to the drought. But now, he looked up. A woman stood 20 paces away, framed by a swirling funnel of red dust. The Arizona horizon behind her was a jagged line of withered saguaro cacti silhouetted against a sky the color of dried blood. She was tattered, her dress stained the color of the earth, with a heavy wooden chest slung across her shoulder by a fraying rope. Her eyes wide and amber burned with a terrifying, lucid intensity. "Who the hell are you?" Wyatt barked, his voice cracking. "Get off my land! The bank takes the deed at sunrise. There is nothing left here but ghosts." The woman stepped forward, her boots crunching on the parched soil. "I am Sarah Mercer. I am not interested in your deed. I am looking for the vein." Wyatt let out a dry, jagged laugh. "The vein? Look around you. The cattle are bone. The grass is ash. This land is dead, girl. This bullet is the only thing of value left here." Sarah did not flinch. She walked toward the porch, stopping where the shadow met the dirt. She looked at his right pant leg, pinned up to reveal a crude limb of oak and iron. "You were a soldier. You know how to fight for a lost cause. Why stop now?" "Because you cannot shoot a drought," Wyatt spat. He lowered the rifle to his lap, his finger still resting near the trigger guard. "Why are you here? Looking for a place to die?" Sarah swung the heavy wooden chest off her shoulder. It hit the porch with a solid, metallic thud. "I know where the water is hiding," she said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding hum. "This land isn't dry, Wyatt. It is just guarded by stone." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "You are chasing a ghost, girl. There is nothing under that rock but hellfire." "I want your survival," Sarah countered, stepping onto the porch to loom over him. "Give me one chance. I will not waste it. I will find water before the sun sets on the 7th day. If I fail, use that bullet then. But for now, put the gun down and give me a shovel." Wyatt looked at the brass cartridge inside his rifle, then at her. Slowly, he moved his hand away from the trigger. 7 days, Wyatt hissed. "Then I pull the lever." The next morning, the Arizona sun rose not with light, but with a vengeance. By noon, the temperature hit a blistering 104 degrees. The air shimmered, thick and suffocating, turning the sundown ranch into an open-air furnace. Wyatt stood on the edge of the porch, leaning heavily on a wooden crutch. He looked at Sarah, then kicked a rusted, splinter-handled shovel off the wooden deck. It clattered into the dust at her feet. "You want a chance? There it is," Wyatt sneered, pointing the tip of his crutch toward a shallow, rock-choked crater 50 yards away. "That's my father's old well, dry since the war. Dig." Sarah didn't argue. She picked up the heavy iron tool and walked straight into the blinding heat. The earth was baked into solid clay and shale. Every violent strike of the shovel sent bone-rattling tremors up Sarah's arms. The dull blade barely scratched the surface, chipping away mere dust. But she raised it, locked her jaw, and struck again, and again. Wyatt dragged a chair to the edge of the porch's meager shade. He watched her work, his eyes narrowed, morbidly curious to see how long a city woman's delusion could last before her body completely broke. "You're wasting your sweat, girl," Wyatt called out, his voice sharp and mocking over the wind. "There's nothing under that rock but hellfire. A smart rat would have run back to the city by now. Sarah ignored him. Sweat poured down her soot-stained face, stinging her eyes. Her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. The wooden handle, weathered and rough, aggressively chewed into her bare palms. Within an hour, blisters formed. Within 2, they tore open. Bright crimson blood began to smear the pale wood, but her rhythm never faltered. Thud, scrape, heave. Wyatt's sneer slowly faded as the afternoon dragged on. The relentless, rhythmic sound of iron hitting rock was maddening. She wasn't stopping. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for water. She was just bleeding into his dead earth. He pushed himself up, limping out into the sun. The cruelty in his voice was now laced with a defensive, almost angry frustration. "Are you looking for water, or digging your own grave?" Wyatt barked. Sarah paused. She leaned her weight against the rusted shovel, her chest heaving violently. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her amber eyes locked onto his, completely devoid of defeat. She wiped a bloody, dirt-caked palm across her brow, leaving a stark red smear on her skin. "If I die, just use this hole to bury me," Sarah fired back, her voice raspy but fiercely steady. "Save some effort for a man who's already given up." She turned her back to him, raised the blood-stained shovel, and struck the earth again. Wyatt stood frozen in the scorching heat, the words hitting him harder than the Winchester's recoil ever could. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost of the Sundown Ranch had absolutely nothing left to say. The desert night dropped like an anvil, instantly replacing the suffocating inferno with a bone-chilling freeze. A pale, skeletal moon hung low over the Sundown Ranch, casting sharp, elongated shadows across the cracked earth. Inside the pitch-black cabin, the rhythmic thud of the shovel had finally ceased, but Wyatt could not sleep. His shattered leg throbbed with the biting cold. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed his wooden crutch, swinging his weight toward the door. Sarah was still out there. She sat in the center of the frosted yard, shivering in her thin, sweat-stiffened dress. The heavy wooden chest sat wide open before her. Wyatt pushed the cabin door open, the rusted hinges whining sharply into the wind. He limped onto the porch, pulling a frayed wool blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Looking for a warm coat in there, city girl?" Wyatt called out, his voice a harsh bark cutting through the wind. "Because frostbite will kill you faster than thirst." Sarah didn't look up. Under the cold moonlight, she wasn't pulling out velvet gowns or silver mirrors. Her bloodied, bandaged hands carefully lifted out stacks of crumbling, hand-drawn geological maps. Next came weather-beaten leather journals, their pages black with frantic charcoal sketches. Finally, she withdrew a heavy brass pendulum suspended from a tarnished silver chain. Wyatt frowned, his grip tightening on the crutch. "What the hell is that?" "My father's life," Sarah replied, her voice raspy but steady. She stood up, the wind whipping her loose hair across her soot-stained face. "He was the best water dowser in the territory. He tracked deep aquifers that geology professors swore didn't exist." "Water dowsers are con men," Wyatt spat, hobbling down the first porch step. "They wave a magic twig, take a desperate man's gold, and leave him digging straight to hell." "He wasn't a con man," Sarah shot back, her amber eyes locking onto his in the dark. "He was a scientist who knew how to feel the earth, and he mapped a massive underground artery right beneath our feet." Without waiting for his cynical reply, she wrapped the silver chain around her torn, bleeding palm. She let the heavy brass pendulum dangle inches above the frozen dirt. Closing her eyes, she began to walk. Step by slow step, she moved blindly past the empty water troughs, past the bleached cattle bones, surrendering her senses entirely to the subtle magnetic pull of the metal. Wyatt watched, the bitter mockery dying in his throat. He had seen madness out here, men drinking sand, men talking to buzzards, but her movements were not frantic, they were deliberate, precise. Suddenly, the pendulum trembled. The brass weight violently jerked, pulling to the left against the howling wind. Sarah stopped dead. She dropped to her knees, the sharp shale biting into her skin. Without hesitating, she pressed her bare cheek directly against the freezing dirt. She closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling slowly, as if trying to synchronize her heartbeat with the deep, buried pulse of the planet. "What are you doing now?" Wyatt demanded, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. He stepped closer, leaning heavily over his crutch. "You think you can hear water through 50 feet of solid bedrock?" Sarah kept her ear pressed to the dirt. Her torn fingers gently traced a dry, jagged crack in the soil. "I am listening," she whispered. The wind caught her words, carrying them through the frost. She finally opened her eyes, looking up at Wyatt from the frozen ground. "My father always said the earth never lies, Wyatt. It is only men who do not know how to listen." Wyatt stared down at her. The icy wind howled around them, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt a terrifying, unfamiliar spark ignite in his hollow chest. He turned away, retreating into the dark cabin. The brass cartridge in his pocket suddenly felt like a coward's way out. The horizon didn't just darken, it vanished. A massive, churning wall of red earth swallowed the sky, turning mid-afternoon into a suffocating, violent twilight. The wind hit the sundown ranch like a runaway freight train. Inside the cabin, the floorboards pitched violently. Wyatt clung to the windowsill, squinting into the blinding maelstrom. Through the thick red haze, he saw a shadow frantically wrestling with a heavy hemp rope. "Sarah!" Wyatt roared over the deafening wind. By the dilapidated stable, Sarah threw her entire weight against the rope, desperately trying to tie down the buckling tin roof. The wind shrieked, ripping the coarse fibers through her blistered palms. Inside the stall, the ranch's last surviving horse, a skeletal gray mare, whinnied in pure terror. The thunderous crack of splitting wood shattered the air. The panicked mare reared up, its iron-shod hooves slamming violently against the stable's rotting front gate. The impact was the final blow. The main support pillar, termite-eaten and brittle, snapped perfectly in half with a sickening crack. "No!" Sarah screamed, shielding her face. The heavy wooden crossbeam detached, plunging directly toward her head. Wyatt didn't think. He didn't reach for his crutch. He kicked the cabin door open and hurled himself into the blinding storm. Sand tore at his face like flying glass. He moved with a clumsy, agonizing desperation, dragging his heavy, iron-pegged leg through the shifting dirt, driven purely by adrenaline. "Grab my hand!" Wyatt roared, lunging forward. He caught Sarah by the waist, using his momentum to violently tackle her backward into the dirt, just as the roof collapsed. A deafening crash shook the ground. The massive beam smashed into the earth exactly where Sarah had been standing a second ago, burying the rope under a ton of splintered wood and twisted tin. Wyatt gasped, choking on the red dust. He grabbed Sarah's arm, hauling her up. "Run! Get to the house!" They practically fell through the cabin doorway, slamming the heavy oak door shut against the howling beast outside. The cramped kitchen